What happens when the most powerful Democrat in the Senate suddenly finds himself trapped in a political corner he built with his own hands? Chuck Schumer thought he had control of the shutdown, the headlines, the narrative, but something shifted overnight. Upward. The plan backfired in a way that no strategist in Washington saw coming. The very move meant to weaken Trump instead exposed the Democrats' biggest vulnerability, and it's spreading through their ranks faster than they can contain it. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand why Schumer's worst nightmare isn't about Trump, but about losing the one thing Washington fears most. You know, there's a funny thing about power in Washington. People think it comes from votes or titles or committee assignments. It was almost clockwork. So when the government shutdown began, Schumer had every reason to feel confident. This was supposed to be his masterstroke. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Force Republicans into a corner, make them look like the obstruction, and watch public opinion turn against conservatives. Frame it as Republicans playing games while Americans suffered. Paint Trump as the villain. Control the story. Control the story. And honestly, it should have worked. That playbook had succeeded before, hadn't it? Think back to previous shutdowns. The party willing to hold firm usually pays the political price. Public frustration builds, moderates get nervous, someone blinks first. And in Washington, blinking first means losing. Schumer was counting on that pattern repeating itself. He figured Republicans would fracture under pressure, some would defect, others would call for compromise. Trump would face criticism from his own party, some party. The whole thing would collapse within days, maybe a week or two at most. But then something unexpected happened. Or rather, something expected didn't happen. Republicans didn't fracture, they didn't panic. They held the line, and more importantly, they started explaining why. Explaining why. See, here's where Schumer's calculation went wrong. He assumed people would automatically blame Republicans for the shutdown, because that's what usually happens. But this time, Republicans had a simple message that cut through all the noise. We're asking for a clean spending bill, 27 pages, no extra padding, no unrelated projects, just the essentials to keep government running. That's it. That's it. Meanwhile, Democrats were demanding trillions, yes, trillions, in additional spending on programs that had nothing to do with keeping the lights on. Projects for various interest groups, funding for priorities that could easily wait, all attached to what should have been a straightforward continuing resolution. When you put it that way, who sounds more reasonable? Who sounds like they're playing games? Now, imagine sitting at your kitchen table trying to manage your own budget. You need to pay the electric bill, keep food on the table, maybe set aside something for prescriptions. Then imagine someone telling you that before you can pay those essential bills, you also have to buy a new boat, renovate the neighbor's house, and fund a community project 3 towns over. You'd think they were crazy, right? That's essentially what Democrats were insisting on. And Americans started to notice. Polling began shifting in ways that alarmed Democratic strategists. Independents, who typically blamed both sides during shutdowns, started putting more responsibility on Democrats. This time, working-class voters saw through the theatrics. Even some traditionally liberal voters questioned why essential services were being held hostage for unrelated demands. The narrative Schumer had carefully constructed was crumbling. And worse, he couldn't plug the holes fast enough. Every press conference where he blamed Republicans just raised more questions about why Democrats wouldn't accept a clean bill. Every talking point fell flatter than the last. That's when the plan began to unravel. And Trump made his move. While Schumer was busy trying to control the political narrative, Trump was operating on a completely different level. He wasn't interested in winning news cycles. He was interested in solving actual problems. And one of the biggest problems during any government shutdown is that military personnel don't get paid. Think about that for a moment. Young men and women serving this country, many stationed overseas, many with families depending on them, suddenly facing uncertainty about their next paycheck. Not because of any military crisis or budget shortage, but because politicians in Washington couldn't agree on spending priorities. That's not just unfortunate, it's unconscionable. So Trump did something both simple and brilliant. He directed the Pentagon to redirect available funds to ensure military paychecks continued flowing during the shutdown. No grand announcement, no elaborate press conference, just quiet, decisive action to solve a real problem for real people. Now, you might be thinking, wait, can a president do that? Is that legal? And that's exactly what Democrats started asking. In fact, they seemed more concerned about the legality of paying troops than they were about the troops not getting paid in the first place. Let that sink in. One Democratic congressman even went on television and argued it was unconstitutional to pay the military during a shutdown. Constitutional scholars might debate the finer points, but to most Americans, the optics were devastating. Here were Democrats literally arguing that soldiers shouldn't be paid while Trump was making sure they got their paychecks anyway. But this wasn't just a financial decision, it was a psychological one. Trump understood something fundamental about leadership that Schumer missed. Sud, when you're in charge, people don't just want to hear you talk about problems, they want to see you solve them. They want action, not excuses. They want results, not rhetoric. And in that single move, Trump demonstrated leadership while Democrats demonstrated obstruction. First, he showed people could be protected even when politicians were fighting. He proved government could still function if someone was willing to make it function. The symbolism was powerful. While Schumer was arguing about budget points and parliamentary procedure, Trump was ensuring a soldier's rent got paid. While Democrats were holding press conferences, Trump was taking care of military families. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Now here's where the optics really shifted into high gear. Headlines started appearing across news sites, social media, and even some mainstream outlets that typically lean left. A Trump ensures military pay during shutdown. Simple, direct, effective. Compare that to the alternative headlines. A Democrats question legality of military payments, or a Schumer, paying troops during shutdown may be unconstitutional. Which message do you think resonated more with the American public? Veterans groups started speaking up. Military families expressed gratitude. Even people who didn't particularly like Trump personally had to admit this was the right thing to do. Suddenly, Schumer's carefully constructed narrative about Republicans causing chaos was replaced by a much simpler story. Democrats were willing to let troops go unpaid to score political points. You see, in politics, momentum is everything. Once a narrative takes hold, it's almost impossible to dislodge, and the narrative that was taking hold wasn't the one Schumer wanted. Instead of a Republicans shut down government, it became a Democrats block military pay. Instead of a Trump causes chaos, it became a Trump protects troops. The media landscape, which Schumer had counted on to amplify his message, started fracturing. Some outlets stuck to the script, sure, but others began cautiously reporting facts in ways that didn't help the Democratic cause. When even friendly journalists start asking uncomfortable questions, that's when you know the message isn't working. Social media accelerated the shift. Videos of Democrats refusing to vote for military pay spread rapidly. Clips of Schumer's tense press conferences, where his frustration was visible, went viral. Memes contrasting Trump's action with Democratic inaction filled timelines. The decentralized nature of modern media meant Schumer couldn't control the conversation the way he once could. And while Schumer was scrambling to explain, cracks inside his own party began to show. You have to understand, the Democratic Party right now is not a unified force. It's a coalition of different factions with different priorities, held together more by opposition to Republicans than by any shared vision. And when pressure builds, coalitions tend to fracture. The progressive wing of the party has been growing restless for years. They see the old establishment, people like Schumer, Pelosi, and Biden, as relics of a bygone era. They want bolder action, more radical change, faster movement on their priorities. They're tired of being told to wait, to compromise, to accept incremental progress. And this shutdown was revealing those tensions in real time. While Schumer was trying to maintain party discipline, progressives were questioning the strategy. Why were they fighting over this particular bill? Why weren't they demanding more? How weren't they demanding more? Why did leadership keep making compromises that satisfied no one? Behind closed doors, the whispers were getting louder. Some progressives were openly discussing leadership challenges. Names like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were being floated as potential alternatives. Not immediately, perhaps, but in the next election cycle, the message was clear. The younger generation was losing patience with the old guard. Donors were getting nervous, too. Not the ideological donors who would stick with Democrats through anything, but the pragmatic ones who cared about winning elections and maintaining influence. They could see the polling. They could read the mood, and they were starting to question whether Schumer's leadership was helping or hurting. For the first time in his career, Chuck Schumer wasn't just managing external pressure from Republicans. He was dealing with internal revolt from his own party. He wasn't dictating the story anymore. He was reacting to it. And in politics, once you're on defense, it's incredibly hard to regain the initiative. But internal revolt wasn't his only problem. Public trust was collapsing, too. Let's talk about numbers for a moment, because numbers tell stories that words sometimes can't. Trump's approval rating had been climbing steadily since taking office for his second term. We're talking about ratings in the mid to upper 50% range, numbers that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. More importantly, those numbers were higher than Obama's were at the same point in his presidency, higher than Bush's, higher than Bush modern presidents. Meanwhile, Democratic approval was sinking. National polls showed the party's favorability somewhere in the 20s to low 30s range. That's not just bad, that's historically terrible. We're talking about approval numbers that signal deep public dissatisfaction with the party's direction, message, and leadership. But here's what really worried Democratic strategists: the demographic breakdown. The groups that had reliably voted blue for decades were shifting. Working-class Latino voters, particularly men, were moving toward Republicans in numbers that should have been impossible according to traditional political models. Younger voters, especially Gen Z men, weren't following the expected pattern of becoming more liberal. Instead, they were responding to populist America First messaging in ways that defied conventional wisdom. The coalition that had powered Democratic victories was fracturing, and nobody in party leadership seemed to have a plan to stop it. Think about it from the perspective of an average working American. Maybe you're a union member in Michigan, a small business owner in Arizona, or a retired veteran in North Carolina. What message were Democrats offering you? Higher taxes to fund programs for people who entered the country illegally. Lectures about privilege and systemic issues. Policies that seemed more concerned with international affairs than your own community. Meanwhile, Republicans were talking about secure borders, bringing manufacturing jobs back, and standing up to China, protecting American workers first. Simple messages, clear priorities, easy to understand. The shutdown made the choice clear. Democrats wanted their wish list funded, while Republicans said, let's pass a clean bill and keep things running. Which side sounds more focused on ordinary Americans? Then came the media shift. Even networks that once echoed Democratic talking points began to waver. Headlines turned neutral. Journalists started asking tougher questions. The shutdown strategy was failing, and silence from friendly outlets spoke louder than words. Public trust in traditional media was already collapsing, so reporters began pulling back for self-preservation. Ratings fell. Subscriptions dropped. Alternative media gained ground by simply presenting facts. Panic spread in Washington. At Schumer's press conferences, the change was visible. Frustration, defensiveness, false explanations that raised more doubts. His composure cracked. He looked like a man watching his plan fall apart. Meanwhile, Trump stayed direct and confident. We're paying the military. We're standing firm. America first. No excuses, just action. Once a leader looks weak, it's almost impossible to recover. Schumer's control slipped, his allies grew quiet, and pressure rose from within his party. Constituents were angry, direction was missing. This wasn't just about one shutdown. It revealed something deeper. The Democratic Party's problems ran far beyond any single leader or moment. For decades, Democrats built their foundation on a few core assumptions: that working-class Americans would always align with the party that claimed to represent workers, that minority communities would remain loyal, that young people would naturally follow the progressive path, and that the future belonged to urban, educated, multicultural voters. But now, every one of those assumptions was being tested. The coalition was breaking apart along unexpected lines, and party leaders seemed unsure how to respond. Part of the issue was generational. The party was being led by people in their 70s and 80s who were trying to connect with voters in their 20s and 30s. The cultural gap was massive. Their priorities were different, their communication styles clashed, and even the language they used felt out of touch. Younger Democrats couldn't relate to the old guard. They didn't remember the Cold War or the Clinton years. They grew up in a different America, one shaped by new technologies, new challenges, and new worldviews. Watching Schumer, Pelosi, or Biden try to connect with Gen Z often felt awkward. Their jokes didn't land, their references felt dated, and their tone lacked authenticity. Meanwhile, the Republican message was cutting across generations in surprising ways. It worked because it was simple, direct, and grounded in the things people actually cared about: job, safety, fairness, and strength. These weren't elite ideas, they were universal concerns. The party that once promised hope was now struggling to promise anything clear. Its message was fragmented, its leadership aging, and its priorities uncertain. The Democrats seemed increasingly disconnected from the very people they said they represented. At the same time, Trump's movement kept expanding. But it wasn't just political. It was cultural. It was cultural. Millions of Americans didn't just see Trump as a man, but as a symbol. He didn't talk like a politician. He didn't hide behind carefully crafted lines. He said what he thought, did what he said, and fought back instead of apologizing. For many, that was refreshing. They were tired of being talked down to, managed, or ignored by establishment leaders who spoke in polished, empty words. They wanted someone who put America first without apology, who represented strength, authenticity, and defiance. This movement was never just about policies like taxes or immigration. It was about authenticity over performance, action over rhetoric, and empowerment over control. And once that cultural shift takes root, it's almost impossible to reverse with traditional politics. You could hear it in the way people talked, at diners, barbershops, and family gatherings. They wanted leaders who led, who made decisions, who stood by their choices. The old political model, poll-tested messages, safe speeches, and candidates afraid to offend, was dead. People could sense inauthenticity from miles away. They wanted real, even if a real came with rough edges. This wasn't just another election cycle. It was a societal realignment. These kinds of shifts don't happen often, maybe once or twice a generation, but when they do, they redefine everything. Think of the New Deal era or the Reagan Revolution. Those weren't just victories. They were seismic cultural shifts that changed how Americans thought about government, society, and themselves. We're living through another one of those moments now. And what's driving it isn't Trump himself, it's the deeper hunger he revealed. A demand for authenticity, for leadership that serves people instead of managing them. And that's what keeps leaders like Schumer awake at night. He built his career mastering the old system, where power came from controlling institutions like the Senate, the media, and the party apparatus. He knew how to pull those levers. But what he didn't understand is that institutional power doesn't matter when people stop trusting institutions. And trust in Congress, media, and government has been collapsing for years. When people lose faith, the old power structures crumble. Controlling the Senate means less when voters think it's broken. Controlling the narrative means nothing when people stop trusting the news. It's like plugging a dam with a paperclip. You can slow the leak, but the pressure keeps building until the whole thing gives way. That's the storm the Democrats now face. A crumbling foundation, a restless base, and a world where old rules no longer apply. They still had power, at least on paper. Democrats controlled the Senate, had loyal media allies, wealthy donors, and a strong organizational structure, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. The ground was shifting beneath their feet. And when your strategy depends on controlling institutions that people no longer trust, what do? Schumer didn't have an answer. Neither did most Democratic leaders. They kept using the same old tactics, not realizing the political landscape had changed completely. And even longtime allies began backing away to protect themselves. Senators quietly distanced from leadership's shutdown plan. Journalists softened their tone, and donors started spreading their money around. Nobody wanted to go down with a sinking ship. When the ship takes on water, everyone looks for lifeboats. By the time the dust settles, this won't just be remembered as a political loss. It will be seen as a turning point, a moment when old assumptions broke apart and something new began to take shape. The traditional bargains no longer hold. Coalitions have splintered. Messages that once inspired now fall flat. leaders who once commanded loyalty are struggling to adapt. And in the empty space they leave behind, new movements and new voices are rising. This is what creative destruction looks like in politics. Messy, uncomfortable, and disruptive. But it's also how systems renew themselves, how new energy emerges, and how real change begins. So, what happens next? That's the question everyone's asking. Will Democrats reform, or will they collapse, allowing new leaders to rise from the ashes? Will Republicans stay united or crack under their own success? Will Trump's movement survive without Trump? Will this cultural realignment continue or fade? No one knows. History isn't predictable. Small decisions can trigger massive consequences, and one unexpected event can flip the entire narrative overnight. But we can see the direction things are moving. If Democrats keep clinging to institutional power, defending unpopular positions, and pretending their coalition isn't fractured, they'll lose more than elections. They'll lose relevance. But if they face reality, refresh their message, elevate new leaders, and reconnect with working Americans by focusing on real problems instead of abstract ideology, they might rebuild. The problem is, reform takes humility. It means admitting mistakes, challenging the status quo, and empowering new people who might threaten the old guard. Republicans face a different test. They're winning now, but victory brings its own dangers. Success breeds complacency. Unity, built in opposition, can fracture once in power. The Trump coalition is strong but fragile, held together more by shared enemies than shared vision. The challenge is to turn that energy into something lasting. Can they truly drain the swamp, or will they become part of it? Can they stay outsiders while holding insider power? Can they deliver for the voters who trusted them? Those are the questions that will define the next chapter. Because what we're seeing isn't the end of a shutdown, it's the beginning of a realignment. And how that realignment unfolds will shape America for decades. The irony is, Schumer himself triggered it, not on purpose. He thought he was playing a clever political game to pressure Republicans. Instead, he exposed the cracks within his own party and accelerated trends already eroding Democratic power. Sometimes in politics, the very move meant to strengthen your position ends up weakening it. The narrative you try to control ends up controlling you. That's exactly what happened here. Schumer, once known as a master strategist, will now be remembered for this moment, for the shutdown that backfired and the realignment it unleashed. Power shifts when people stop believing in the illusion, and Americans have stopped believing that Washington works for them when vested in. They've stopped believing the media tells the truth. They've stopped believing political parties represent their interests. And strangely enough, that's a healthy sign in a democracy. When people grow skeptical of power, demand more from leaders, and refuse to accept empty promises, real accountability begins. It's painful for those who thrived in the old system and uncomfortable for institutions built on public trust. But it's how democracies stay alive. We're living through that disruption right now. It's messy, it's chaotic, but it's also the process of renewal, the shift of power from the few to the many. If this breakdown made sense to you, if you see this change happening across America, share your thoughts below. Let's keep the conversation going. Stay sharp, stay curious, and be ready because what comes next could redefine America as we know it.